Welcome to the Bible in Our Culture, an outreach radio ministry of Liberty Remnant Church, where we encourage you to view the culture through the lens of the Holy Bible.
Hello, I'm Pastor J. McPherson with Liberty Remnant Church. Glad to have you with us on the Bible and our culture, where we look at the culture through the lens of the Bible and resist that constant temptation to try to look at the Bible through the lens of the culture. We've been talking about Ephesus the last couple weeks, and we're going to move ourselves from the book of Ephesians into the book of Acts, where Paul has been having a tremendous ministry in Ephesus. Basically, by his regular teaching, the whole province of Asia has heard about the word of Jesus. People are repenting. People are burning their witchcraft items. It's been phenomenal. But we're going to take it up where things kind of go sour. In verse 23 of chapter 19, Paul had just decided it was time for him to move on to Macedonia, and he sent Timothy and Erastus ahead of him. Now he's staying in Ephesus to clean things up, and something kind of nerve-wracking happened. Starting here in verse 23 of chapter 19 of Acts, it says, "And about that time there arose a great commotion about the way." Now the way is capitalized here in the New King James, the translation I'm using, meaning they're talking about Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. Verse 24, "For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who had made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of a similar occupation and said, 'Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods, which are made with human hands. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship.' Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath, and cried out, saying, 'Great is Diana of the Ephesians.' So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord." This theater, by the way, is considered one of the 8 wonders of the ancient world. It's this giant coliseum to this sex goddess Diana, and it seems that they conducted civil affairs, political affairs in this theater. And it says in 29, they seized Gaius and Aristarchus. These were guys from Macedonia that were going to escort Paul to his next ministry place in Macedonia, and they were there in Ephesus to grab Paul, and now they're being seized by the mob. And Paul, of course, is freaked out, and he wants to protect them. So in verse 30, it says, "When Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. Then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent to him, pleading that he would not venture into the theater." All right, it's kind of like a Antifa rally at this point. Verse 32, "Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. But when they found out that he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, 'Great is Diana of the Ephesians.'" They kept repeating this over and over again for 2 hours. They put some of the anti-cop, defund the police, Black Lives Matter, Antifa folks to shame. 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Verse 35, "And when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, 'Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana and of the image which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of your goddess. Therefore, if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you have any other inquiry to make, it shall be determined in the lawful assembly. For we are in danger of being called into question for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering.' And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly." All right, there's some interesting things there at the last half of chapter 19 of the book of Acts. I think we have a lot in common with the book of Acts, not with our smartphones and our underwear, if you will, They had loincloths and they had abacuses or whatever those things were to do their calculating. We have all sorts of technology, but there's a lot in common. That is, this seems like a riot. And why? Something silly. Over the loss of the demand of their product, idol merchandise. They wanted to keep selling idol merch. They're making a profit. And if people are coming to Jesus and forsaking the goddess Diana, they ain't going to make a profit. So they incite a mob. It seems mobs form quickly and have a lot of force mixed with it and little wisdom. I would say that about most mobs. Angry mobs tried to overthrow Moses. They tried to overthrow David and other leaders in the Bible. It was an angry mob who crucified our Savior. Mobs rarely have any intelligence or wisdom, just a lot of anger, a lot of emotion, and quickly get carried away by the wrong things. So as we look at verse 23, at about that time there arose a great commotion about the way. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. Okay, they were making a lot of money in the idol shrine selling business. There is nothing wrong with making a profit honestly. I think it's Isaiah 48:17 that's talking about God redeeming Israel, that he's going to teach them to profit. He's going to teach them to go the right way. Usually, idol merchandise is not going to be an example of godly profit. In fact, idol merchandise is an example of a sinful profit. Their motivation is dishonest gain, as the Bible puts it, or as the King James says, filthy lucre. Right? They are looking to trick people into believing about this great goddess Diana, this great tourist attraction, and they're going to sell shrines, they're going to sell idols and other merchandise for the goddess Diana. That is an example of dishonest gain or filthy lucre. You realize how much our currency actually has germs on it, being passed along from hand to hand across dirty counters? You know, one thing good about the Biden White House is I think he's cleaning up all this filthy lucre, all this filthy money, because I keep hearing about his money laundering. So if he's got money laundering happening, at least he's cleaning off some of the germs off of all of our currency, which I think is a good thing, right? But they don't go and approach this. I'm talking about these Ephesians craftsmen. They don't approach it, hey, we want more profit, but they rather approach it by taking a stand for the community. It's much better for public relations to approach it as if they're the noble ones, they're the kind ones, they're the caring ones who are taking a stand for the community, when actually it's a Trojan horse. Man, that seems to be how a lot of these rioters today live their lives. Verse 27, Demetrius is talking, he's the idol maker. He says, so not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, great is Diana of the Ephesians. They won't create a riot screaming, we want to maximize our profits by selling more goddess Diana merchandise. That's not going to get them anywhere. But hollering, great is Diana of the Ephesians, has way better optics for that population, because the city of Ephesus was known for this temple to the goddess Diana. They had to package the issue to hide their true motivation. They had to revive the people's sense of community and harden the people against the way, harden the people against Jesus. That word community, if you've been around a lot of leftists, they use it a ton. It's their justification for just about everything. Well, we have to raise taxes because we have to take care of our community. We have to wear masks and get a experimental shot because we have to care for our community. We all have to be in this together as a community. I began to not like the word community. And it wasn't so much that I didn't like community. I mean, as a church, there's this great sense of community at a healthy local church. But it was community-ism. It was this ideology of community this, community that I called community-ism. Oh, and it occurred to me, communism. Basically the same thing. They're using our heart and care for the community as a Trojan horse to raise taxes, to do more regulation, to control. And it's wicked. It's the devil's superpower. He is the father of lies. He is the deceiver of the world. So consequently, he's going to make his way by tricking people into thinking he's got something good, but actually it's going to bring destruction. So it seems like Halloween, a divisive phrase, has been a way more typical of the darkness than the light. You can see in the news how all the leftists, all the socialists, They love to riot and protest, and usually their protests turn violent and destructive, and they seem to get away with it. We don't see a whole lot of protesting on the right. People that love America and love family and have traditional biblical values. We don't protest that much. They get away with it because they have no reason. They have no logic to present their case. And if you yell something often enough and loud enough, you can convince most people that it's true. People who are immature and have nothing in their minds, they've not really figured anything out, and they don't have good problem-solving skills, good discernment skills, they're going to believe whatever they hear often enough and loud enough. And it's a terrible trend in our society, especially in an era of quick, easy answers. Right? If we have the ability to get just about any quick, easy answer we want, hey, how long has Joe Biden been in quote-unquote public service? We can ask our smartphone, we can ask our Echo or whatever we may have, go online, do a Google search, and we get information instantly, and there's no real struggle for it. So consequently, we expect everything to be a quick, easy answer, even some complicated moral issues. Furthermore, we have a society of attention deficit disorder. I think smartphones and technology has contributed to this, where it's hard for us to really focus on a problem and really work it through. So consequently, in the back of our minds, we're thinking quick, easy answers. We can't focus long enough to come to a real mature answer. We're just going to say, well, whatever people are saying often enough, loud enough, and forceful enough, they must be right. That's so destructive. I believe God's calling his church to come out from among them and be separate and say, no, we're not going to do the quick, easy answers. We're going to be discerning. And I think if you listen to the Bible in our culture often, and you listen to other shows like that, and you spend some time in the Bible and listening to sermons, the good sermons, you're going to begin to discern how ridiculous a lot of these claims that people are shouting over and over again. They're totally ridiculous. Protesting does not seem to be the first tactic of God's church. Surely not rioting. Now, I'm not saying let's do totally away with protesting. I remember a healthcare freedom protest we had in downtown Spokane. It was awesome. We'd been cooped up so long, and there's all these people, many of them believers, saying, we're not going to wear masks, we're not going to get the shot, we're tired of you shoving your baloney down our throat. And there was this great sense of togetherness. It wasn't an angry protest. It was like a celebration of freedom and celebration that, hey, we're not the only ones. The media makes us feel like we're the only weirdos that aren't going to wear masks, but we're not. There's a whole bunch of others. There's a remnant who has not bowed their knee to the gods of this age. But it doesn't seem that those of us on the right, those of us who believe the Bible, that angry protests are going to help us. Part of it is the media is going to twist it anyway. So a lot of times our protests don't do any good. Let's go back to Acts 19, verse 29. It says, the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord. Verse 32, it says, the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. It's an interesting word there, and an interesting process here. It is significant the crowd was an uproar in the city, but an assembly in the theater. Once they got into this theater, in this Colosseum, they became an assembly. It seems that certain people were summoned to come to the theater, either because of the uproar or because they thought, hey, we got to have a meeting. And they played their role in deciding what action to take. That's when they became an assembly. Now listen to this. The word for assembly, 3 times in this passage I just read, that word for assembly is ekklesia. Ecclesia. Now the word ecclesia, if you know anything about Greek, it's translated church almost every time. In fact, every time in the King James Bible, but these 3, the word ecclesia is translated church. But somehow in Acts 19, it's translated assembly. Pretty crazy. And I'll say this, most of them, like all the translations that I found, like a dozen of them, all of them in Acts 19 translated the word ecclesia to something besides church, assembly, congregation, something like that. That's not right. I think that's disastrous. And I think the consequences in the English-speaking world has been disastrous. Because now we don't know what the word church means. We don't know what the word ecclesia in the original Greek means. Guess what? It is not a religious word. It's a political word. And we can see that here in Acts 19. Biblically, church, or ecclesia, is more closely related to things like a jury, a senate, or a council. It's not related to words like tabernacle, synagogue, or temple. Now, if you're driving around, listen to this radio show or listen to a podcast, you're thinking, who is this guy that's totally going off the beaten path? Doesn't he know what most churches think? Most people in this movement called Christianity would equate the word church as a religious word, might even call it a building. The church is not a building. That is tremendous error. Now, guess what? We call it a building a lot because that's what they do in society. At Liberty Remnant Church, we're excited to have a new building. And so what do people call it? Oh, here, you got a new church. And I'm going to say, oh, there's a work party over at the church. It's not a church. It's a sheep shed, really. We're Jesus' sheep. He's the great shepherd, and he protects us and feeds us and guides us like a good shepherd. So in that sense, we're sheep. And a building is merely a sheep shed. But the church is ultimately a who. It's a political word, a assembly called out to make a difference in society, to stand with authority and make decisions about what the community is going to do. So church is far more related to the words jury, senate, council, Congress, so on and so forth, than it would be to something like a tabernacle, synagogue, or temple. So when there was something significant happening in the community, people came together as an ecclesia to decide what would be done about it. That's what an ecclesia does, and that's what a church does. Let's take a quick break and be back in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Isaiah.
Hi, I'm Addie, and would like to invite you to
Liberty Remnant Church. The youth of America are looking for authenticity.
We are looking for what is real in a culture that doesn't even recognize male from female.
Who will model biblical priorities?
Like our radio show, The Bible and Our Culture, Liberty Remnant Church in North Spokane is not afraid to apply biblical principles to the hot topic issues of today.
LRC is a simple, relational, biblical church who enjoys worshiping God while fulfilling our sacred duty to shine God's light to our generation.
So, if you're looking for a church,
or know somebody who is,
please consider what God is doing at Liberty Remnant Church.
You can find more information
and maybe even where our new building will be located
at libertyremnantchurch.org.
Once again, that's libertyremnantchurch.org.
Hope to see you soon.
Welcome back to the Bible in Our Culture. We've been looking at Acts 19, and this word that's translated assembly 3 times in this chapter, referring to the people of Ephesus deciding what to do about Paul, and the fact that he converting people to Jesus has caused them to lose profit by selling merchandise for the goddess Diana. So all these people come together in the theater, which we believe is the great Colosseum of the goddess Diana. And once they come together, they're trying to decide what's going to be done about this. That's what an ecclesia is. That's what a church is. It's not a religious word. Ecclesia is the same word Jesus chose for us. He chose us to be his people, and he called us his church in Matthew 16. Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus says, hey, flesh and blood didn't reveal that to you, but my Father in heaven. Verse 18, he says, and I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my ecclesia, my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. That's authority to make decisions about what's happening in the community. That's why Jesus called us church. Now, the word church is only mentioned 2 or 3 times in the Gospels. It's mentioned the other, whatever it is, 100 and some times in Acts, the epistles, and Revelation. It's used a lot in the New Testament, but not much in the Gospels. Jesus kind of created a word, says, hey, this word, this political word, ecclesia, that has to do with an assembly about what's happening in society, that's what I'm going to call my people. So growing up, I heard over 30 years ago that the word church or ecclesia was a political word that literally meant called out. So I was probably in my late teens, early 20s, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I knew that the word church meant called out ones, but I didn't know it was a political word. Oh, that's interesting how words develop over time. And I never really thought much about that role of the church as a political assembly. And even though I loved the church and felt a need, even as a young person, to be cognizant of what's happening politically, I didn't realize how it connected the word ecclesia to politics. It's basically an inseparable word. It's an inseparable connotation. Jesus used this political word to describe his people and how we should live. Jesus chose a political word to describe his people. Well, how does that apply today? Well, if we really understood what this word meant, and the translators didn't totally rip us off by failing to translate it correctly, we would be thinking, oh man, we've got to be involved in what's happening in the real world. We've got to be salt and light and influence the worlds of civil government, education, entertainment, anywhere that God's kingdom is not established. We, his ecclesia, are authorized, and our responsibility is to go make a difference. But when people say, well, the word church is a religious building, we fail to understand what's going on here in Acts 19. We fail to understand our role. So consequently, we live in a day where the church has very little influence politically because we thought, well, we shouldn't be involved in politics. Not understanding that the word ecclesia, the word church, is a political word. So consequently, we're not involved. And of course, the secularists tell us we're not supposed to be involved. Separation of church and state. Separation of church and state. That ain't how it works. Separation of church and state is a perversion of the original intent when it was said by Thomas Jefferson, standing up for the First Amendment. That is a one-way wall of separation, protecting the church, protecting an establishment of religion from civil government influence. And so if you say you're a Christian, well, then you can't have any say in the world of politics. I've heard about this at a college university. A whole bunch of people were running to be the university president, the student body president, a bunch of students. And one gal got up there and said, I think I'll do a good job as president of this university because I serve Jesus and he's called me to love and serve you all. Well, then somebody else got up, maybe right after her or a little while later, and said, well, because of the separation of church and state, you understand that now that she has declared that she's a Christian, that she cannot be objective and therefore nobody should vote for her. Are you kidding me? Because she says she's a Christian, she disqualifies herself from even running for university president of the student body. There is such a twist. The devil has successfully twisted this concept of ecclesia 180 degrees to where it seems to mean the opposite of what Jesus intended when he first used the word back in Matthew 16. I'm not really trying to be difficult here. I often use the word church incorrectly myself. As I mentioned earlier, Liberty Remnant Church has a new building. And how many times does people say, oh, you got a new church? And I'll say, hey, I'm headed to the church for a little bit. No, I'm not. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but the truth is, the ecclesia is not a building. The ecclesia is a who. And the word ecclesia is not a religious word. It is a political word for people that should be about making a difference in their communities. A couple more things I want to mention before we are done. Acts 19, verse 33, says, they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. But when they found out he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, great is Diana of the Ephesians. Could you imagine hearing that for 2 hours? I was down at Spokane City Hall one night, expecting to address the city council, and a bunch of Marxist agitators, whatever you want to call them, anarchists, anti-Semitic, anti-police, socialists, took over the building. It was a riot. They wouldn't follow instructions. They just kept doing their own thing. And I just sat there and watched, thinking the cops were going to come and bring order, and they never did. And these Marxists, by the way, never had any reprimand. They didn't have any penalty for that. In fact, they got a big meeting and they redid a resolution with their input. Pretty crazy. But I understand what kind of riots can come against the Lord Jesus' church in this hour. So when we look at this verse, we see this guy, Alexander, who is a Jew, tries to stand up, and then when they heard he was a Jew, they basically chanted this crazy, I'm thinking it's a Marxist phrase, great is Diana of the Ephesians, for 2 hours, not letting him talk. Well, that's racism. That's anti-Semitism. And that's why I think it's like today. We see racism everywhere, mostly by the people who think they're not racist. They're looking at everybody through the lens of race, and they are themselves racist. But the anti-Semitism of the last while has to break your heart. I mean, Jesus was a Jew, and the disciples were Jews, and most of the people in the Old Testament that are heroes were Jews. How can we be anti-Semitic? Another reason I think that this story shows how much similar the book of Acts is to today is when reason is not effective, repetitive hollering is utilized. I mean, the guy wants to make a defense at the ecclesia and basically say, hey, this is what's happening. And they found out he was a Jew. Not only did they not like the fact that he was a Jew, but they wouldn't let him talk. Were they going to reason with him? Were they going to make their case logically before the people? No, that's not to the advantage of the devil. That's not to the advantage of the worldly forces today. They're just going to holler, great is Diana of the Ephesians, and just shout people down so they don't have to engage in honest debate. We're seeing this over and over again. I saw it at City Hall. We see it almost every time I turn on the news. Anytime there's Antifa or a pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas group, anytime there's an anti-police or Occupy Wall Street was kind of the phase a few years ago. They don't have any logic. They don't have a defense. They don't have anything to say, so they just get loud and see if they say it loud enough and often enough and repeat it enough, and everybody will have to come along with it. And guess what? Many people are. It's a concern. A generation that's raised on quick, easy answers tends to just go with whatever the loudest, most consistent voice is. That means we, the ecclesia, have to be a consistent voice for righteousness. We have to be doing our job and being salt and light at City Hall, at the school board meetings, in the state legislature, and even in D.C. We've got to be making a difference, being the ecclesia, being the called out ones, a political term that say, hey, we have authority to decide what's going to happen in our communities. That's what a church is, and I believe that's why Jesus called his people his church, his ecclesia. Glad to have you with us today. Please check out our website, libertyremnantchurch.org, where you can catch past episodes of the Bible and our culture. If you're in the Spokane area, I'd love to have you come visit us. Check out our website so you know where we're meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Bible and Our Culture, an outreach radio ministry of Liberty Remnant Church. If you want to support this ministry financially, you could do so by going to our website, libertyremnantchurch.org/give, and select Radio Ministry. See you next week at the same time.